I've been teasing this one for a while. Today, we're actually at my training.
We gotta call frisbee golf again. Frisbee golf again, I know.
I got here a little bit early so we can start our session early so that we have about 10-15 minutes after to get perspective from a certified strength and conditioning coach, someone who specializes in improving speed and power and has worked with a lot of other rotational athletes, and get his opinion on my disc golf form and kind of disc golf form overall. We've had a lot of conversations about it, so he's more primed to this conversation, but I want to get like an introductory talk with him here on the channel, and then we'll dive really deep later. But this is my last training session before I leave for DDO, but I've been teasing this for a while, so I wanted to get something up to you and just introduce you to these concepts because they've been very helpful for me as I've been learning my body, which muscles are supposed to do what things, and then how to throw more effective.
Yanking where you're strong. Just go, you can focus on the go.
All right, so what's the premise? Give me a little lowdown so I can have a thought of the process.
So essentially kind of an introduction. I think later we can like really break down stuff a little more, but here I just want to like more of your thought process of like what my form looks like, what the main things that you're looking at are. And you're really good at communicating, so like kind of layman's term. Find one of these that you want to look at. In general, before that, just give a premise of like our training, what we're trying to focus on, and then how it's gonna translate.
Yeah. So what we do really well, and what we always want to make sure that anybody that is playing any sense of sport, especially throwers, you want to make sure muscles dictate technique. If the muscles do not dictate the technique, we'll just always transition to technique. But what breaks down in technique is always the muscles. So there's different muscles. There's 17 in just one shoulder girdle. So when there's that many muscles in a shoulder girdle, it's a lot harder to say my technique's really bad. Sometimes what we want to make sure is that there's like a sense of what is that muscle's job and what is it doing. So that's where we go really, really deep into your body, and especially when you're throwing. So when we look at the way that you're throwing, what we can see is we like starting from the ground up. When the ground goes up, it's easier to understand what's rotating, what's not rotating. All joints rotate around a pivot point, even your elbow. We call that like a hinge, but it rotates. Put a program more together for you when it comes to when you look at your hip. Does it pop up into your lumbar, which would be your low back? If it pops up and in, that would be what's called unstable to us. When something's unstable, it doesn't move around a joint very well. So when it doesn't move around that joint very well, or that pivot point, it's harder to make sure your technique is actually up to par, pun intended, right?
So you're kind of saying that if the muscles are unstable, maybe in my case, especially since I throw so much, overused and weak, then like working on the technique can only get you so far.
It can only go so far. You're gonna get frustrated, number one, because you're like, what's wrong? And then you'll overcompensate. And when you overcompensate, you use those words where it becomes really weak, overused, or overused and weak. And when you overcompensate, you're just gonna try to do the opposing side of it.
I'm gonna pause this real quick because compensation is such an important part of this whole conversation that we didn't quite dive into very much. He had another client coming in, so I let the conversation go wherever, and there's a lot of good nuggets in here. Essentially what we're talking about with compensation is when you throw or do any movement, if all your muscles in your body were able to be working perfectly, it's a muscle that would be used for that movement. So one of the things that we're working on right now that you saw at the end of that kind of training montage was my belly, my rectus abdominis, basically the crunching muscles, the abs that you want to see. The reason for that is if you watch some of my throws, especially more recently, those are just not being engaged at all. And so in order to compensate for that, I'm using the opposite side, which is my spinal erectors, my low back. My body knows that I want to rotate, and this is very weak. So it's going to use something that's stronger to compensate for that. That weakness maybe is just something that has developed over time from underuse, or in some cases, you overuse an area, and so it's a little bit strained and too weak, and so your body starts to compensate in another way in order to throw. And so essentially, compensation, almost everybody has some form of it, and I'm trying to train it out of me almost completely, but it's probably never going to be completely out. There's always going to be some sort of compensation. And essentially all that term means in this part of the conversation is that you're using one part of your musculature or a part of your body to do the job that something else is better equipped to do. But it's not better equipped than you, so you're compensating through this other thing. So that's the main thing that we're training for, so that we don't have those parts of my body, lots of different parts inside of those 17 muscles of my shoulder that we've been working on, new ones that I keep finding out every single week because I'm weaker and weaker and weaker, and then my belly for right now. And if you watched yesterday's video, you even saw the start of this because I filmed that video right after I filmed this. And you can see that my throw was much more coiled throughout my core because we were working on those muscles so that my body knows that they're there and is able to use them in throwing. That's what compensation means. Let's dive back into it. Lots of good stuff still coming.
We want to find the middle ground of that. So yes, exactly what you're saying. Sometimes it can become an overuse where it's like all you do is throw, and there's nothing to combat that type of stress. And that's where the training gets really important, is because you're not combating how hard it is on your body to just throw. Second, the repetitive stress. You throw. Cool thing is there can be different shots in this and different styles of throws, but it's still the same movement. So it can cause overuse issues and breakdowns in your technique because of the breakdowns in your muscles.
So one of the things that we've been like looking at and like kind of trying to tweak forms and like try to find some cues, and one of the things that we're looking at here specifically is putting my whole back foot on the ground. And I had mentioned this a little bit in an earlier video. When we like look at a throw like this as compared to some other throws, why are we trying to put that back foot on the ground?
The movement from the human body would be a pronation supination. That's where the foot just needs to be able to flatten and cave in. It needs to be able to open, it needs to be able to cave in. But because you compensate through your calves so well, if everybody wants to see beautiful calves, look at him.
Beautiful non-working calves.
All they do is work, right? So we're trying to see, and if you see your back foot always hitting the ground through your toes and your calf, your foot never rotates in. If your foot never rotates in, nothing can rotate through your hip. So you'll open it really wide. Instead of being able to actually hit the ground, rotate, transition that momentum up through your knee into your hip through the trunk, where typically you get stuck in the ground on your toe, and then you have to overreach through and like everything and fall into the front leg, and then it's like, well, that front leg's not a peg leg to spin around. Well, it's mainly because of that back foot.
So when we're looking at kind of this transition to now, I am kind of putting that whole back foot on the ground. The last time, yesterday actually, we had talked about, okay, from here into the next transition, into the front foot, what is kind of the problem with that weight shift that we were looking at yesterday?
And so I'll answer that question here in a second. What you'll see though is how your hips are so much more level. There's not like an up and down, but remind me, what was the question?
So now that we're getting to like a more level, like stable in the glute, what's the problem with this next weight shift? Like I'm not getting all of the way into that front foot. Like what are we talking about?
Cool. Yeah, so what happens on the outside of your leg is there's some muscles that keep that leg strong from it not shooting up into your low back, and the more and more those get strong, so what you would do is when your leg would hit the ground, it would pop your pelvis up, and then it would drop your elbow. You have to compensate. But now what you see is a little bit better positioning, better than what it was, but positioning of that front leg, being able to handle more force through that front leg. So when you see that front leg moving forward, you're able to put it into the ground stronger and then not pop it up as high. Yes, it's better, but of course we can always work on getting it to be the best it can be.
The transition off the back leg yesterday, we've been talking a little bit about how I'm now doing better about getting my foot on the ground, but then my weight kind of stays closer to my heel instead of going like from pronation to supination. It doesn't do the opposite to get that off of that back leg. So there's still like kind of some weight lingering back there that doesn't transfer forward.
So the movement's gonna happen where you go from your foot to that, but then being able to lightly hold that position is what we need to work on more, is because it's like you're now thinking about being able to move that foot in and out, but then that hip hasn't seen that enough to be strong enough in it to say, hey, let's move around this. So that's where it can break down a little bit still, where it's more of like, now I'm learning the technique, but now you want to make it robust in that technique so it doesn't adjust.
And so we're talking about getting onto the X step foot from like toe to heel, so that the whole thing's on the ground.
Outside foot to the inside foot.
And then back to the toe to transfer the weight. And that's one of the things that I'm really not doing. And we were talking yesterday about like how do we work on that, because I'm still opening up those hips a little too much. What we were talking about is now thinking about maybe moving that plant foot a little bit more forward instead of directly lateral, because maybe moving it more forward will help me to stay stable in this hip and not open the pelvis. Instead, I'll keep it closed so it can rotate around itself.
Yeah, and what is rotating around it means the trunk. We want to make sure that the pelvis is stuck where it is so that your trunk can rotate, and then you can tell the disc where to go. Instead of using your upper body to try to control your lower body and then control the disc at the same time.
Talk about my upper body, because that's where we got a little bit of breakdown. We're working a lot on trunk over this week, and then hopefully next week while I'm in Emporia, I'll be able to continue to kind of drill that home. And that's one of the fun things about like having Tommy here is I'm going to be able to work through all these next 8 weeks basically that I'll be on the road. I'll be back for 4 of those weeks, and so we'll be able to have a lot of training here. But during that time, not kind of using that as a wash training wise, but really trying to come back next week after being in Emporia and be like, oh, this is actually better, this is good, and then come back after the month that I'm gone and be like, oh, this is really, really good. So.
Yeah, you want to keep what we came up with. Now with the upper body, what happens is when a pelvis moves too much, the upper body is going to have to open or reach. And sometimes what
you think I reach?
We can do.
You think I reach sometimes? In my throw? That's crazy.
That's crazy, isn't it? Causes elbow pain and wrist. But the overreaching sometimes of reaching through his shoulder blade can counterproduct the trunk rotation, which would be around the belly button area to make that thing rotate more, where we look and see if there's passive or active range of motion. So when it's passive and you see him reaching really, really far to get into a momentum place, you can see it's not like coiled like a little twist top, like it's, and then it can untwist really fast. It's more really like straight and straight instead of real twisty.
This would be more backwards compared to
coiled.
Instead, it's my shoulder is kind of coming here, and so they're not rotating the same.
You're reaching across instead of spinning across. So you kind of reach across instead of spin across. And if you can spin across, then you can have your arm free to wherever you need to put it. But that's where sometimes the reach across is going to cause you to try to control your trunk and control the disc at the same time, which can cause quite a bit of breakdown.
I think a lot of that is dictated by the lower body, and so tightening up that pelvis area is going to be really helpful.
Anything from the rib cage down.
And then with the upper body as well, we talked a little bit about this today. I learned about upper rotation. Is that something
of the shoulder
that
girdle.
Struggling with here as well?
Yeah, so you want to get into what's called, the big terms are called protraction and retraction. All that means is your shoulder blade can wrap around in front of your rib cage and behind your rib cage. It can reach up around your rib cage and down towards your rib cage. And what can train that is we're looking at the overuse of the wrapping from throwing. So you want to train upward and downward to keep the middle part really healthy when it wraps.
Because you were saying I have like really robust like rotator cuffs and then nothing else in my shoulder.
That's the thing that's holding your shoulder girdle together, and that's where you put so much stuff through that rotator cuff that everything between your shoulder blade and the middle of your back needs to be able to pull that shoulder blade behind you so that your elbow can then do what it's supposed to do, your arm can do it. That's where sometimes you'll make your arm do everything that your shoulder blade should do.
Yeah. I know a lot of this stuff is like not crazy actionable. It's like really informative, and maybe it could be actionable for somebody, but are there any specific actionable things? Because obviously like I'm coming here, I'm like paying to be here to work with, in my opinion, some of the best understanding of biomechanics rotationally so that I can like throw better, and hopefully 6 months from now my throw looks completely different and I'm significantly stronger. But is there anything that people who maybe don't have the resources to do something like this, like whether that's money or just like people with the know-how, anything that they could do to like think about this for themselves?
Yes, 100%. So that's going to be more of making sure you get your body to rotate to both sides. Make sure that you're strong in both sides. You never just want to be strong on your throwing side. Everybody can like control their belly through movement, rotate the other way through that. That's something to practice, especially if you're going to practice throwing and do before throwing. 100% rotate all the time. But make sure that it's your what's called internal and external obliques. The inside and outsides of your belly is actually doing the movement, and you practice that. The second thing would be practicing like pulling your shoulder blade around your rib cage in all different areas, not like your arm or this. Just see what the congruency is. Like just practice pulling your shoulder blades together. Practice opening them up where it's going through your shoulder blade, not your arm, and doing things of that nature. So it's a lot of becoming first off, informative, which is great. Second, aware of where is my information. So that's where I think just becoming aware, filming yourself throwing would be really important. That's so that you can then understand a little bit more of where you're breaking down. And so that then you're like, oh my gosh, why does my shoulder get really high? I should probably practice pulling it down so that it goes across the middle.
A couple things for me as a trainee to understand that is, one, stuff is going to feel like weird, but I would recommend, if you're especially doing this by yourself, do it in a mirror. Because there's so many times, even still, like we've been training, what have we been training, 6-7 weeks maybe together?
Yeah, about 6-7
And so
weeks,
but there are times that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing this right, and it's like, yeah, well, you like dumped your shoulder blade forward, or like all these things that I feel like I'm doing right, and I'm like moving something that's not supposed to be moved. And then with the T-spine stuff, which is like the obliques, it's gonna feel weird, but like you literally have to feel like this side is pulling you this way, and this side is pushing you this way, and then control it on the way out too. That's like, it's a weird feeling, but it's like really cool when you can do it correctly. And then the last thing is like with filming yourself, filming your form, and then even like doing these things, give yourself like grace and time, because it's amazing how much the body adapts when you are intentionally trying to make it adapt. I came in here today and we had worked on something yesterday, and then I had just like not done anything, and today's like, you're a whole different person.
I guess we're supposed to film you a little more since you're really good on camera.
And it's because I like didn't do it perfectly yesterday, but I did it intentionally. And then I came in here today and my nervous system had adapted it closer to what I wanted it to be. And so if you have the intent to do it correctly, it's gonna work for you, and you don't have to do it perfectly, and it's gonna take a lot of time. This is one of the things that is working me towards that next goal that I had, which is the beginning of next season, 2025. I feel like there's so much time because I have like 9-10 more months before that comes up. And so I'm excited to see what can happen here, and giving myself that time horizon allows me to kind of feel like I suck at a lot of things for now and know that they'll get better. And when you give yourself that grace period, it gets better faster than you think. So
yeah, it can be hard when you gotta ride a bike again with training wheels. And then once the training wheels come off, it's like, I did not know I could do all of this.
Yeah, thank you. Tommy, do you want to shout out your gym?
We're Strength to Strength Performance in the Broomfield, Colorado area. We've been here, and then we've got a second location coming soon into the Arapahoe community area.
Sweet. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody who doesn't wear sleeves in here gets ripped apart.